We've been missing you. Do you want to find the witch friends you've been missing? Do you want to participate in these conversations live? And do you want to support the work of recovering a true history of feminist ideas about magic? Do you want to hang out? Do you want an invite to Zoom together with Amy and myself every new moon, along with our hilarious, diverse, wise, queer, creative, anti-racist, science, and awe-loving coven? You must join the Missing Witches Patreon. It's pay what you can, and we can't wait to meet you there. Patreon.com/missingwitches.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Welcome, witches. Welcome, listeners of all stripes, flavors, species, moods, mood boards, auras. Yeah, welcome you, whatever your body is like today or your brain is fritzing at today. I'm happy you're here in this strange moment in late stage capital, in this moment of the reemergence of something, the death of something else. At least we're together. I'm going to say welcome to the coven, those who are here and those who are listening later, in our great project of de-hierarchizing our process and learning more from all of the powerful beings that we get to encounter. You're here again today, you're portaling in and out, and it gives me strength when I feel a bit lost. So thanks so much for being here. And thanks especially to our guest today, Charlie Watts. I'm so excited to dig in. I have like 7,000 things I want to talk to you about. Your photography is stunning. You are running this beautiful art practice business called Aura Weaver that I'm fascinated by as someone who had a migraine for 10 years and saw auras as a part of that experience and never really knew how to talk about it. And occupational therapy, you're doing your PhD. You're one of these witches that we get to encounter who are sort of deep, and you don't have to claim the word witch, so I won't put that on you if you don't want it, but
I will claim it. I will claim
it. One of these fucking witches, witch doctor to be, straddling that line, which I find so interesting and inspiring. So that's my intro. I want to just suggest, while you're listening, folks, do the Google while you listen and go see these beautiful images, and think about brilliant colors. Especially if, like me, you're looking out on a world that's a bit white and gray right now. Charlie makes a world that is full of brilliant colors, and she's here to share those stories with us today. Welcome, friend. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so honored to be here. It's always funny to hear other people talk about like what you do, because when it's in your day-to-day, it's just kind of like, oh, this is what my day looks like.
Right.
Oh man. But I'm doing good. It's an interesting moment. It's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is like, it is winter, but it still seems like there's this like ramping up at different seasons. Like I feel around Valentine's Day, like to celebrate St. Valentine, there's this like ramping up, and I'm just like, I get curious, like why? Like, shouldn't we just like have our winters be winter?
Right. Yeah. What are we ramping up for? I keep reminding myself, like, this is just dreaming season still. Like, just go a little slower, lady. What is it like? First of all, what do you think an aura is?
So I think, and it's interesting to hear. I've had the migraine auras too throughout my life.
Okay.
And interesting, with specifically like with the aura, I think a lot of it is like our relationship with our energetic body in a lot of different ways. When in general, when we kind of think of the aura, it's traditionally this electromagnetic field of layers of colors surrounding our energetic body. And it can be very expanded, it can be very contracted, it can almost be this duplicate of our physical bodies. Like I like to think a lot about, like, we definitely have like our energetic lungs we have that are like duplicated in the aura. We have like our energetic kidneys that are outside of our body in the aura. So I come from a lineage of color seeing psychics. So my grandmother could see auras very clearly just in regular conversation. So kind of from that background, my experience with like actually seeing auras usually is only something that happens like after, either in conjunction with something like a migraine or after hours and hours of meditation. But like for me, it's much more of a feeling. It's much more of like this like sensing. It's almost like I tend to like tell people it's like, when you feel someone walk into the room but you don't hear them walk into the room, it's because like those energies are like brushing against each other.
Do you remember as a kid your grandmother talking about that?
Never got to meet my grandmother. She passed on before we could talk, but from hearing from family, it was the experience that I heard of her seeing. It was she would be like, that person's like so purple. It's just such a purple person. And like we're Mississippi folks, so like rich Southern accents. But I think for her it was a useful skill in just like understanding who people were. She was a wild woman, just completely wild. So I think it was just like one of her skills of being able to connect with folks quickly, because when you're on the road, you got to connect quick.
Oh my God, I want to know so much more about the wild woman on the road, seeing purple people. That was definitely what auras were like for me during my migraine, was just color. What's it? So for you, it's more a process that you encounter through meditation and then you feel it. Was getting the camera something that changed you being able to see color, or was there color there before for you?
There was a lot of color there before, like just as, being a forever artist, like my foundational practice is like creation and creativity. So I had always worked with color so extensively throughout my life that it might have not been the same process as the aura photography per se, but it was like a very similar, like how do you work with color? How do you work with the sun to like capture like a certain image or create a certain process? And but it was really it was interesting, the story of the camera, because the camera we work with is super rare. It's called the Auracam 6000. It was created by this scientist named Guy Coggins, who was if you want to go down a rabbit hole, there's some really great YouTube videos of him. But essentially what Guy Coggins did is he worked with 100 color seeing psychics, and he actually did brain mapping to come up with an algorithm for this camera. So I had seen the photos and immediately fell in love with them. And the cameras are rare and they're really expensive. And I was, I had just graduated. I was working as a baker. I was like one of these very little money at the time situation. So I actually was working with a friend to see if we could develop our own. And through that process, I accidentally stumbled across one of these at an estate sale. So we call her Dottie, Dottie the Auracam. It's the most opinionated camera I've ever met in my entire life. You can almost like with Dottie, the previous owner was this older gentleman who like used to bring this he liked to travel a lot, and this was like his party trick, was he would like travel around the country, and like the way he would make friends is he would do their aura photos. So it's just like one of these beautiful serendipitous direct manifestation fate things, just because since we've Dottie came into my life, I think at this point we've taken around 8,000 aura photos. So
wow, Dottie's really holding in for you.
she likes to break frequently too, so she's very old.
Can you tell us some stories of working with Dottie, maybe times when you were like, oh, look at this, or I don't know?
So with this kind of camera, essentially, so there's the camera and then there's hand sensors that are connected to the camera. So people like come in and they put their hands on their sensors, and it's detecting like how much electrical output you're producing. And if you can kind of look at it as like reading your meridians. But one of my favorite experiences is one of the things the camera does is sometimes these like big orbs of color will show up. And and like to each their own with like, you know, your own structural beliefs. It's kind of funny being a photographer. I think we as humans, like we so want to see what we can't understand. So there's like this need for photography to show us something that it, not necessarily that it can do. But I was photographing a friend, and the photos take a couple minutes to develop. So we took the photo, and we got to chatting, and he started crying because his familiar had just passed. He had a little cat that had just passed. And so then we start talking about the photo, we start talking about the different colors, and then we get to talking about something else. And then we look back at the photo, and there's an orb shaped like a cat on the shoulder where that familiar had like to sit. And like both of us were just like, what? So it was, you know, it's again to each their own on their personal beliefs, but it was just it for me. It was very much this familiar being like, I'm still here.
I love. I mean, 8,000 photographs. You must have. You must have so many stories like that, or versions of that, where people saw something in themselves in that picture. I mean, people come to you for that, to see something in themselves, I imagine.
Yeah, and I'm super grateful for this particular form, if you want to look at it as like just a photograph or like a certain form of divination, because it's just a really beautiful reminder that we are these really colorful, vibrant beings. I think a lot of times people don't see that in themselves. Like the question I get the most is like, what if I have a black aura? Or like, what if I don't have an aura? And I think there, like with aura, it gives ourselves maybe just like the slightest permission to like view ourselves as like little walking rainbows around the country, and just to really like tap into that we are energetic beings. Like there might be something past the, you know, the meat puppet of our physical bodies. So
Right. I mean, for you, that must be sort of undeniable at this point. You've seen everybody glow.
yeah, I've seen lots of glows, and you know, I've also just seen aura photography is a really gentle divination process. It's a very you know, I kind of, you know, with like tarot, if you're in a reading and you're like pulling the tower over and over again, how it's can be these like this like immediate pull to like examine life. But this like with aura photography, it's more of this like opportunity to kind of celebrate. Like not that we can't celebrate ourselves through tarot, it's just it's a little gentler.
Sure. Did you, when you first got Dottie, did you guys play around and photograph each other?
So yes, we've done like and it was really interesting. So my partner and I, Judah, we run Aura Weaver together, which has been a really beautiful, like, you know, to have like a lover and a business partner. It's actually been really great. But we've taken a lot of experiments of each other. And the first ever Aura photo I took was of him. And it was really funny because with that photo, so they're depending on how the light is set up, there are moments like within photographs where I get a lot of messages from people being like, I took this photo on my iPhone. What do you think this orb is? And I'm like, usually it's like, oh, well, it's probably a lens flare. Like, you know, I've been I was a professional photographer for over a decade. So it's like, because it's like, but with Dottie, she does this thing sometimes where if the light bounces off of your hands really strongly, your hands will actually show up in the photos. So there'll be these moments of these it'll be you, but then all of a sudden your hands will be like disembodied above your head. So one of the first ever Aura photos I took was that of my partner was like that. And it was just like, what is going on?
Do you think you learned things about each other in that process?
Absolutely. It's really, so speaking of purple people, Judah is one of the most purple humans I've ever met. He is, you know, and when we think of purple is one of the colors, it's a little more, you know, you can go a lot of different directions with it. Kind of the way I think about purple is like a lot of like third eye energy, a lot of like whatever your version of psychic is, like the knowing before you know. But it can also mean you're like very in your head, like very imaginative, very in your head. And so Judah is continuously purple. It's, you know, it's been years of us working with this camera now, and he's just been purple the whole time. He'll have some like glorious exceptions, as opposed to like the colors I operate in change drastically almost every day. So
Really? That's so interesting. The colors that you operate in change every day. Can you tell us more what the colors mean?
absolutely, yeah. And we could, yeah, I'll kind of like, we can like break it down a little simply. I could talk about this for hours, but in terms of the different colors. But the way I kind of, and like the way I work with in my aura readings and just with color in general, is I do a lot with like the chakra systems, like in the different, so like, you know, they're different with like those wheels of energy in our body. With like the kind of the placement of the colors is like really similar to what that energy center functions as. So if we think of something about like the root chakra, so like that's the energy at the base of the spine, and it goes down into the legs. So it's the energy of the physical body that connects us to the planet, because it's like going down through. So it's very very rooting. But we use red with the root chakra. And so for me, red is always about being super grounded. It's about being very present. Red is kind of, for me, it's almost like a trickster color too, though, because it keeps you really grounded, but it also is like that first little push on the journey. It reminds me a lot of the Fool in Tarot, because when I think about the Fool, a lot of times it's almost like, if we knew how hard things were going to be, why would we get out of bed in the morning? So it's like we almost need that like jovial, like kind of like, I'm just going to do this energy. So like with the Fool and like with red, it grounds you, but then it gets you going. It like activates that beginning journey of like moving from like the root to the head. So like kind of like moving like through that, like above red is orange, which is like our sacral chakra. And that's very much, you know, because that's where our sex organs are. So it's very it's like the physical and literal place of birth. So a lot of manifestation, a lot of like color, that a lot of people who work with orange are artists. Like orange is one of my primary colors, and like a total tangent within the colors. When we're working with aura photography specifically, we're usually photographing mood colors. But like similar to astrology, we have soul colors that we're born with. Like, you know, like I was very stuck in my Libra rising, but like we have these like aspects of ourselves that we're born with. So we have usually 2 or 3 soul colors as well. So orange is one of my soul colors, just because it's that creativity, it's that collaboration. I would say orange has been suffering during the pandemic, just because orange loves other people. It loves it being around a fire and howling with your friends is like a very orange experience. I don't normally talk this much, so
I'm just going to wind you up and keep you going. I'm in love with everything you're saying. I wanted to tell you too, and I want to keep talking about colors, but I was really drained before we came on this call, like super excited, but super drained. My kid's having these like panic things in the night. So I'm tired and just trying to be there for her and find patience in places I didn't know I was storing patience. So before this conversation, I lit a purple chakra candle, and I don't really think about color that much. So I just ordered these recently. It's like a beeswax purple candle, and was like, I just need this. This is going to help me just to be in the moment with this beautiful person. So it's funny. And my mother and my kid are both all purple all the time, people.
it's a great color to have around. I mean, it's kind of a spooky color to have around too, in a good way.
They are spooky in a good way.
Yeah, my mom's very purple as well. Like her energy is very purple, and I'll call her, and she was like, "I know why you're calling." And I'll be like, "How do you know? How do you just know these things?" Like,
yeah, that's the conversation I have with my mom all the time. Mom, you're not supposed to tell people what they're thinking. That makes people feel weird.
Yeah, and I think it's, it's good to be so intuitive, but it's also just like, Mom.
Yeah. Well, and you nailed it when you said like they can be so in their heads. Like I think sometimes being in that energy, like my kid too, she picks up on every wave that goes by and then has such an active imagination trying to interpret what the waves are because she's a kid, so she doesn't understand. She's getting so much emotional information, and then her stories about what's happening are so batty in the best way.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But well, speaking of kids, like kind of like moving, like I'll try not to talk so deeply about each color, but it's the after orange is yellow, and yellow is kind of one of the rarest aura colors I've seen in adults. It's associated with joy and optimism and play, and like the kiddos got that on lockdown, and then I think we, it's at least like my personal experience with play was like super playful, and then like in high school it's just like kind of all shut down. And so now, like years later in my 30s, I'm like, okay, what do I actually like to do for play? What do I want to use that like sunshine energy for?
Yeah, I think play is such an important piece of our magic making that, whether we reclaim it through our kids or our own sort of grasping back of our time and finding ourselves again. Yeah, play gives us a lot. Okay, let's keep going. I want to go deep on all the colors. What comes after yellow?
So then we kind of move into the heart space, and with the heart space, it's kind of like that bridge from like the earth to the sky, the physical to the spiritual. And the heart is it's an interesting one because it operates in like several different colors. So it's primarily green. So like when we think about just like big love, like it's one of those, like green is like, because it is like it's our nature, it's our grass, it's our leaves. Green is very much about like sharing love with other people, as opposed to pink is very much about sharing love with your damn self, like. So you kind of like need both, because like, with pink is very much about like loving you or loving me, and then like green is very much about that shared love, that shared experience with other people. And then the color that I'm using the most right now is blue, because blue is the throat, and it's all about self-expression, it's communication, it's expansion. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how people rarely say no. And like most of the time, even if it is a no, there's like an explanation of why it's a no. So it was like even funny with, I was thinking about, I've been listening to this podcast for so long, and it was just like one of those things like, oh, what a dream to talk to these beautiful people. And then I like sent like a random message to y'all, not even talking about that, and then here we are.
That's cool. I didn't know you were listening to the podcast. I mean, I don't know who's listening to the podcast, obviously. They're out in the dark.
Yeah. And then like it's, I've read the book, and I was just like, it was just this really wonderful convergence of like, oh, this is so exciting. So like with blue's also like in terms of expansion, it's a really when we think of blue, it's water, it's the sky, it's these very large spaces. And with water, water's a good reminder to go with the flow, because it always travels least path of resistance, but it also has the power to carve away at rock. So
when you said you're working with blue, what does that look like for you?
So, and it's specifically like with color magic in general, it's one of those, it doesn't have to be so hard. For you can make things as complicated as you want them to make them. But so when I say working with blue, like I made sure to drink a lot of water today, because I knew I was going to be talking more than I normally talk. And I will visualize monocolors. I'll just like sit and like try to visualize one color wrapping around my body is one practice that I've done. And like candle magic is a really potent way to work with color. It's one of those, like when you're invoking like in anointing candles, like if you're working with specific colors, that's a really beautiful way to work with color. And in terms of like with candle magic, that I feel that if you're trying to do something a little bit more specific, that's usually the way to go. So yeah, that's kind of, it's funny. It's one of those things I just do. Again, people are like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah. Well, I love to hear just some examples of, I guess we talk about play and then also to think about work, like, the way that a witch works is different. It's a different kind of labor. So I love that you say you're working with blue, and then I can just picture you closing your eyes and wrapping yourself in blue and then calling us to you. I love that. Can we talk about how this idea of the energetic body and this familiarity you have now with the colors that people carry around them, how that works with your research or your practice as an occupational therapist?
Absolutely. And it's been like a really long journey to figure out, because it's like, as a practicing artist, for so long, I definitely had this like, just these like little moments of like needing a little more structure in my life, or wanting to. I am super grateful for my art practice and I will always continue it. But there is this moment I had with art practice where it felt very isolating and very much like I am creating my work and I am not. I think art definitely serves as a beautiful aspect of community, but for the work I was making, I wasn't feeling that. So I did a really big deep dive on how best I could serve my community and like what would align with the work that I'm already kind of inherently doing. And so I kind of went through a lot of like the major medical professionals and I was like, which one is the closest to witchcraft? Because I had worked as like an herbalist before, and there was just like, I was looking at these different aspects of like how to kind of like sneak in the back door through the mainstream. And I found occupational therapy, and it has been just incredible what I've seen. So for those who don't know, occupational therapists, they work with activities of daily living. So it's kind of like, basically they help with barriers that affect a person's emotional, social, and physical needs. So it's one of those professions. It's cradle to grave, and it is it's a very dynamic trade. So in terms of like working with like the energetic body and occupational therapy, I knew I wanted to do something that was a little bit more like, it was in between physical therapy and mental health, and occupational therapy is such a beautiful bridge between those two, because it's when we think of like holism and like being a holistic practitioner and working with the whole body, I think OT does a really beautiful job of like addressing people's emotional needs, because I think so much of that can invite healing into the physical body as well.
Yeah, I find occupational therapy so cool. I think I was under the like misconception initially that occupational therapy was about getting people back to work, because it has occupation.
Yeah, a lot of people have like, I almost like, not that I have any power over this, like I almost would prefer the word functional therapist.
Right.
I think that's a little bit, just because I get a lot of people who are like, oh, you can help me find a job. And I'm like, no.
No, this isn't about like increasing your productivity, but it has that sound in it. But it is about like how you occupy yourself and how the repeated ways that you use your body like wear you, and how you can make small shifts in how you use your body to have some ease, I think, right?
Absolutely. And basically it's very much about like a lot of times it's about helping people regain independence in all areas of their lives. So either through, if someone's had a stroke, like working with them to then be able to brush their teeth independently again, or it can be I've done a lot of work in pediatric settings. So, we, with our, ADHD kiddos, it's like helping them figure out like how to operate in a school system that's not necessarily set up for them, and like coming up with strategies to like really help them do their work. And so it's a lot of different avenues you can work with OT, which is a big reason I was drawn to it, just because I'm someone who needs to do something different pretty frequently.
Right. Can you talk about that more? I guess the ADHD piece. We're working on a circle for Astara around neurodivergence and witchcraft and that overlap, kind of centering a bunch of witches who are neurodivergent to kind of lead us, help us figure that out, think through that. Insert question here. I don't know. Can you think out loud about that for me?
Yeah, and I think that's originally why I had messaged you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm also neurodivergent. I work with them, and it's been really challenging to, of course, the moment for those on the podcast, my cat is now getting right in the middle of everything.
This is the moment they've chosen. You're like, I am neurodivergent, and there goes the tail.
It's like, what? So it's been an interesting moment for me operating, because I have most of my life been, operating as an artist, and within that field, my working with ADHD had been really helpful, because it was almost like getting like hyper fixated on one project.
Did you have like a diagnosis at some point as an adult or as a kid? Did you?
I had it as an adult, so
as
it's
an adult. I've heard that's really hard, like sometimes liberating. I don't know.
I think for me, it's been kind of like getting my chart read of like, oh, that's why I do that.
Awesome.
Or it's just like, I just like little things, like I am holding my hands down right now to not put my hair up and take my hair down over and over again. Like that's definitely something I normally do all day. So now I'm like very aware of it. So I'm trying to like, okay, you don't need to take your hair up, put it down, take it up, down. But as an adult, it's been interesting now being in this doctorate program that's really rigorous, and it's almost, you have to be almost like robotic to get the amount of work done that is demanding. Like to get the work done in this program it's just been very hard, and it's I've had to like re-examine a lot of aspects of my ego, because I was used to being good at school, but I had never been in school this in this type of capacity, so it's been very hard. But it's also been it's great to be in OT school though, because then you can actually learn about what you're dealing with. But like in terms of like our kiddos, like, so I've worked with a lot of the kiddos I've worked with, we do a lot in sensory gyms. So they're like these big gym spaces that will have swings and like trampolines, trapeze. And with our hyperactive kiddos, it's really good to have these big sensory gyms so that they can kind of wear themselves out, and then we can kind of get into like more of the I guess the aspects of like what traditional schooling needs, so like handwriting or working on, I've done a lot of work with picky eaters as well, and then I've loved it because we do a lot of like arts and crafts. So like OT was founded essentially as like so after World War I, like all these veterans were coming back who were shell shocked, and a group of women would essentially basket weave with them. So it was like this history of like weaving and doing these like practical crafts to like help them regain functionality. So
I'm so happy you reminded me of that. I remember a friend telling me that was the origin, and I had totally forgotten. How fucking beautiful.
It's all weaving. Everything's weaving.
It's all weaving. Wow. So when you're working with a kid or someone with an injury and you're in your OT headspace, how do you draw on what you know about the energetic body, or do you think about aura when you're thinking about helping someone regain mobility, or is there crossover in those parts of the brain for you in that moment?
There is, and like I'm hoping to, like with the profession in general, like move there are some really wonderful very witchy women who are also OTs, but like always like being kind of aware. Yeah, it's like that wanting to like fully show up for a kid, but like certain things, like I do a lot of energy work. I wouldn't necessarily, start with that with
Sure.
a parent. Like there's definitely this movement of these really beautiful kiddos coming in who are very sensitive to any kind of stimuli, and it's almost like their emotions just like are the ocean. It's like, and so it's with working with a lot of those kiddos, it's like when they come in, they just like their energy is like so expanded that they just like almost like controlling anything is super hard, or like doing like focusing would be really hard. So as like in terms of like aura work, I can definitely sense that within a kid. And it's, with in terms of like aura, like when I'm in like more of like a conversation with someone, I'm not going to be seeing colors usually, but there are these like physical sensations I will feel. Like it's almost like the certain kiddos will come in and it'll just be like that waft of joy of just like, it is the nature, it is like beauty, but like other kids will come in and you'll almost feel like pinpricks, like because they're so uncomfortable in their bodies. So it's really trying to help them understand and sculpt their own energy in a lot of ways without necessarily using that language.
That makes sense. That's so interesting, moving from describing it as something you see to something you feel from them. The pinpricks, I mean, is that something that came through for you studying OT, like being able to feel people's energy or think about kids' energy in those from different sort of sense perspectives? Because you were primarily an artist, was it always kind of there in the mix for you?
It's always been very there for me. I had a near-death experience when I was 10. And that's when things got really weird in a beautiful way. So I was inner tubing with my family and flipped off and was held underwater under a tree for a long period of time, and had the kind of the traditional experience of like, the tunnel of light and being greeted by all of these beings. And basically, I was asked like, do you want to come now or do you want to come later? And I said would like to come later. And then like right at that moment, a family friend ripped me out from under the tree that was being held underwater. And like since that experience, I feel like when you have those like moments of like crossover, it illuminated a lot of things. And it was tricky as like a younger person, because when I was younger, I would see very clearly like these spirit guides. They would just be like sitting at the foot of my bed. And as you grow older, you shut that off. And then now I'm trying to like come back to like understanding what if some of those experiences might have actually been, other than just kind of like at the time they were like very terrorizing. Yeah. To like wake up with this like illuminated owl like just staring at you. So it's always like that energy's always been there. I remember even before that happened, sensing that a friend was having a hard time, and then I would imagine these bubbles of light, and I would send the bubbles out to friends. And then it was interesting like years later to like learn about like different energy modalities, like with like Reiki, like, these ideas of like this distant healing. And I was like, oh, like, I used to do that. No, I still do that, but
Yes, I do know. Yeah, I've had a lot of similar experiences. Do you find it's so interesting you say you're seeing this wave of highly sensitive kids coming through? What do you think that's about?
So this is my own personal take. So with like the kind of the nature of the universe, we're speeding up and we're expanding. Mm-hmm. Like with entropy, it's just like this constant expansion and speed up. And I think that it's as that is happening, like energetically, the kiddos are the ones who are going to be picking up on this stuff first a lot of times. So that's like one of my kind of thoughts. Another aspect of if we look at something like autism, like, do more children have autism now, or are more children getting services now? Like, so it could also just be this awareness that is like coming through as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be that it might not be that there are more sensitive kids now than there was. It's just maybe there's more awareness, there's more education.
Yeah, of course. That old chicken and the egg. I asked because I'm interested in the whole thing, obviously, but also I think it was Sophie Strand, someone we interviewed recently, was talking about it either in a piece she'd written or in that conversation about early childhood trauma increasing a kid's sensitivity. So for her, becoming suddenly like intensely aware of snail sparkle and, lights, and because it was tied to being like constantly watching the door. And I think about that now a lot. When I hurt myself when I was a kid, I described it as being stretched thin. Like I just felt like I was very thin, very porous all around me. And now my kid's gone through this scary thing where she's been in anaphylactic shock again recently. And I just see her being she was porous to begin with, but she's sensitive to light, she's sensitive to sound, but she wants to be the fucking boss all the time, which I relate to both those modalities. But it's interesting to think about, these kids in this world where they're hearing about so much trauma, like people are rattling death counts across over their heads, and they can't see their friends and their families. What is that gonna be like for them in the long term?
Yeah, and I have like my younger siblings are much younger than I am. They're like 18 years younger than I am. And just like seeing their experience in like middle school, high school now compared to like my experience. And with the having to, like, one of my siblings is such an incredible activist, and I'm like when I was your age, I was like at the mall. Like, but it's interesting. Yeah, I just read that essay that Sophie Strand wrote, and she liked one of my memes recently, and I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, so exciting.
I get that. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's with like, yeah, I definitely like agree with like how trauma can shut you down certain ways, but like open you up in others. And it's almost with a lot of my aura readings too, this comes up where it's like, how can we honor these sensitivities, as like, how can we integrate them in a way that is that doesn't feel overwhelming? Maybe I'm not exactly sure how I'm trying to state that, but I am like very much a crier. But I almost like consider that a superpower, as opposed to and it's one of those things, like with my partner being male, we've had to like talk about frequently, because there's moments where it's like, no, I think we should honor the emotional path as opposed to the like stuff it down and get it done.
Right. Would you say that when you've looked at people's auras, you could see trauma or anxiety or fear, or is it integrated there in a way that maybe we feel like is harder to achieve in here?
It's more, I can like, yes, I can feel that, and it's I can very much feel it in people's energy, like with trauma, or with had some really strange experiences with people who were about to cross over, where it was almost this like suspension of like time in their energy field that was at the time was just very strange. But like now I'm like more understanding about what was going on in those situations, and it's one of the more so than like trauma, is one of the things I've really noticed within energy is most humans are so giving and so beautiful and so wanting to help. It's almost, I do a lot of sound healing work, and we'll do energy work with people separately from the aura photography. And I almost have to tell clients a lot of times, like, you don't have to work on me. Like, this session is about you. But there's this like almost like this like spiral between the two of us of sharing energy. But I have encountered a couple people where it's reverse, where it's like actually like the energy is like being sucked in, and immediately it was like, no, like immediately no. And I made the mistake of not honoring that gut reaction to these individuals. And it ended up being some of the worst situations in my life were what the actions that those people did. So.
Wow. And does it ever show up in a color, in a picture? Does Dottie see it?
It's with the photos in general, it's usually more about like what you're experiencing in that moment. So one of the things I tell people a lot of times is like, I can't tell you if, like, for example, if a lot of blue shows up in your photograph, like, is it because you're needing that throat support? Are you needing that like help with communication, or are you communicating really broadly? Are you using that center? So, or even like with like red, like is a lot of times I've noticed red will show up for me if I'm working a lot in a more like maybe corporate patriarchal like late stage capitalist type way, because like with red is very much like it's kind of like a weighted blanket and will keep you in your body because you're like, I want to dissociate, and body's like red's like, nope, we're staying super present. So it kind of has that duality of like, is red showing up because you need grounding, or is red showing up because you're grounded? So I like with people, it's one of those, like, I can, through a conversation, we can kind of suss that out, but usually it's like, what's your gut reaction to something like that?
Sure. That's so interesting and makes total sense. I want to invite the coven, if anyone wants to ask a question, or go for it, Cassandra.
Hi.
Yes. Hi.
Okay. I do have my kiddos home. It's a snow day, so I'll apologize.
All that yellow energy is welcome here.
So first of all, hello, Charlie. It's so lovely to meet you. I very specifically wanted to ask, and I know this is a very specific question, so I am expecting a broad answer or something that, maybe isn't necessarily just on my situation. So hopefully that I'll preface or caveat with that. But my oldest kiddo, we are currently working on an ADHD diagnosis. Literally just started the process yesterday. So imagine this. And I loved what you were saying about color magic and how that is something that's very easy. And I, unfortunately, with our public school system, what I had taught him to do when he has a welling of energy that he just can't quite get rid of when he needs to write in particular, is to hum, kind of regulating that central nervous system. However, in a classroom setting, we're with a group of people, and if we're supposed to be, quote unquote quiet, humming isn't something that's, I hate to use the word acceptable, but we'll go there. So back to color magic, is there maybe a color that I could ask him to visualize instead if he's needing a little bit of a release, just as like to see where he goes with that, and if that's something that maybe he'd like to do instead of automatically humming, let's say.
Well, even more so than like a color, like with them is, if it bringing in the breath, like, is a really good one, like doing like 3 really big breaths. Like in terms of, we were kind of talking about like, I mean, red is that ultimate grounding color. Yeah. So, but red is also kind of like a dynamic color in the way that some people it's like red can mean passion, other people red could mean violence. So mine is more associated with that, like that earth energy, that juicy lava center of the earth. So like red historically is the grounding color. I think one of the things with like working with color in general is honoring our own, like figuring out like maybe what your kiddo's like favorite color might be, and like starting there. Because it's one of those funny things with color, we see color drastically differently. Like it's I did one of those, there was like one of these, it was like a color wheel where it was like one color in the middle and then like 50 colors around it, and you matched which one matched. And like my dad and I see like almost opposite colors in terms of like what shows up, all of that to say, I think, yeah, red's a really beautiful one. You know, I think a lot of times with, I think blue is also a really powerful one, just in general, like that communication thing, just because like I'm someone who will just like blurt things out and then be like, oh, like that's not what I meant to say. That's not how I meant to say it. That was not the right time to say it. Or like whatever the right time is. But so like blue kind of is one of those, I do think of that as like a really beautiful regulating color too, to just kind of like bring that energy in. But I think like working with your favorite color is like, I think that's, you know, really fun, especially with the kiddos.
And then Charlie, what would you tell a kid like that? You know, what would the work be like? Just, you know what I mean? When do you start to draw on the color? Is it before you start to feel agitated? Is it in the moment? Especially if you're a kid, like how do you really wrap your head around? Now you're just trying to stay fucking present. Now you got to meditate.
I mean, it's so tricky because it gets you're wanting to catch things before they become like a big emotion. As an OT, one of the things we talk about is Mr. Glassman. So, you know, Mr. Glassman, he's made of glass, and like, you know, if he gets too big, he'll shatter. So it's almost like you create these stories. So like with Mr. Glassman, there's like, it's almost like green, yellow, red, and thinking like you can even think of like that in terms of like color of like green is go, yellow is like, okay, maybe I'm feeling something, and red is that like need to stop. So that's kind of like different than what I was talking about earlier too, because, you know, these colors have these different functions. So like, just like in terms of like more practical OT, like day to day, we do a lot of works with kids to like, can we identify how we feel when we feel yellow? Can we, like in the yellow zone, can we identify how we feel when we're in the green zone? And then like setting it up to like because like within terms of like this language, like with the red zone being like the having the hard time or the shutting down, like even just being able to talk about that and like honor it. So
yeah, thanks.
Hi Charlie. I actually do have a question as well, so again about my daughter. First daughter, overachiever, always did everything super early. My second one, she's okay, so we're all earth signs in the house, and then my second one is a Cancer, so she's the water sign. She's very emotional, and she actually often talks about colors, like today I like to be purple, today I want to be green, and she always goes green, purple, blue. So those are her colors. But it's funny because in her daycare, and it was in French, so they had a Monsieur Rouge, and that was the timeout man. Monsieur Rouge is like the red. So when you said the glass man, but I'm just wondering, like when she gets, like we've thought about taking her to an occupational therapist, and I think that might be the route after you explained a little bit about it, that might be the right way to go. But she gets very it's almost defiant. Like at school, she's in kindergarten now, so I know it's still early, but she was very defiant when things don't go her way, and then she just breaks down. There's no talking to her, full tears. And is there something I can tell her to do at that point to kind of get through that and be able to talk to the teacher at least to see why she's so upset about it?
Yeah, you gotta love those super defiant.
I know.
I love them. I have this one beautiful soul who I gave him some homework recently, and he like looked at me, like dropped it in the trash, like while he was like, I was
no.
Yeah. I was like, I feel like doing the same. But I think it's tricky because like when you're finally in that like super big emotional state, I think like the best thing is to just sit with them and let them feel it. But that's so tricky when it's like those like group settings where it's like
Right.
we're supposed to be. So I think it's like, yeah, just being able to sit with them is really important. And I think this is like my own personal.
No, for sure. Yeah.
It's not as opposed to as like an occupational therapist of just like being able to sit with them and like let them move through it on their own, as opposed to trying to control it in any particular way. With more so in terms of like what, like for example, like what we would do. One of the things that I don't like to use the word trickery, but it's like it's funny with like the different kids, like especially with our kids who get like hyper fixated on things. It's a lot of like negotiating of like, we can do that thing you really want to do, but we need to do this first. But it's hard when they're like, if someone's in like already a big emotional state. So I think like figuring out maybe like what does that yellow zone look like for them.
Okay.
So like you can like start to like maybe slow it down or just like help out or just show up. Like figuring out what some of those triggers can be, because like a lot of times with some of our more sensitive kids, the things that are like triggering them it's hard for them to express. Like for example, like a lot of kids, like if their tag is bothering them, like that can, like the difference with like, you know, the way we kind of process information is that we can kind of selectively choose what we're paying attention to. Like I'm not paying attention to how my socks feel on my feet, I'm not paying attention to how my hair feels on my head. But with certain kids, like they feel all of that. So it's removing those triggers, and it's going to be different from kid to kid. So like and like even like in terms of like, had some kiddos like with certain diets, like, you know, just certain foods, like if they like having to force them to eat certain things is just gonna not go well for anyone. So it's kind of like figuring all that out.
Yeah.
So
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we definitely, even today, we just had to like sit with her and be like, yeah, you really want to do that. You want to do that so bad. You're so mad and so angry. Mom and dad keep saying no. You really want to do it. And we keep saying no. And that was like finally the thing that unclenched. And she was like, but I have an idea. I was like, you have an idea. And it's hard to have another idea. She's like, yeah. Like you could tell it was like a tape she was in, you know, it was like, I have an idea. We'll do this. But yeah, just really being with her as she played through the tape was what finally got the tape to stop. Also, she likes close your eyes. She'll be like, close your eyes. And then she'll do what you've been asking for, or then she'll come for the calm down hug. She doesn't want you to ever see her change her mind or give in. So yeah, we'll be like, I'm sitting right here, I'm right here, I'm with you, I love you, but I can't see you. And when you're ready, and then that'll be like enough for her. Like she wants to get her shit together in private. She has a lot of pride for a 3-year-old, which I respect. Julie, I saw the mic thing go on and off. Did it work?
Yes, I left and came back and it worked.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It is comforting to know that some people who are neurodivergent are becoming OTs themselves. I have so much more trust in health practitioners who have lived experience. So as someone who's neurodivergent and disabled and chronically ill, my question is around this concept of independence. And I guess it's kind of a question for the occupational therapy field, but asking like, why is that the goal? I've kind of been on my own journey in recent years of, I became disabled 8 years ago from traumatic brain injury. And my whole recovery journey has been focused on, I got to get back to independence. I got to get back to independence. And that has created so much anxiety because I'll get better and then have a crash and get better and have a crash. And I may never get there. I may always need a caregiver, for example. And switching my focus to the goal of being interdependence has just opened my world in a way that I wish occupational therapists, psychotherapists, and everyone in their therapy was saying, like, that's the goal. These tools are just like coping strategies for living in this capitalistic, individualistic world, but really the goal is interdependence. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that from the field of occupational therapy, or just your own thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for asking that. I think it's such a, like, I love the idea of interdependence. I think that is, I'm going to carry that for the rest of my life. Because it's interesting with, like, so for example, like with a lot of orthopedic OT, like usually like the settings I've seen, like with a lot of our people who come through, like usually like the main thing people want is to walk again. And like as OTs, it is the question to ask, like, well, why do you want to walk? Like, can we talk about like energy conservation instead? Like, so with like this like idea, I think it's very wrapped in like patriarchal, like that we always need to like return to like our 20-year-old self, and how that is just not how like a functioning body can maintain. And I think it's with OT specifically, it's more like supporting people with what occupations are important to them. So with, you know, with a lot of people, you know, going back to the walking example, it's like, well, why do you want to walk? And then it's like, well, because I want to do this, like, you know, I want to be in the yard with my kids. So then it's like, we can start working on, well, can we set up a way for you to be in your yards and with your kids that might not necessarily support like a certain, like that like hyper, or totally lost my train of thought, but like how can we set it up so that it is like there are still aspects of those occupations we can support, because it's one of, like, you know, like I'm a total kitchen witch, so like, you know, cooking is always really important to me. So with people who are wanting to like be more in the kitchen, like how can we set up certain things in that way without necessarily like having them do all of the work per se.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I really loved your answer. And what it made me think of is kind of a lot of work being done around how we reframe accessibility as well.
Right.
Like I'm a disability justice activist, and kind of like my own definition for accessibility is creatively offering different ways of fully participating and like equally valuing them all. And I'm hearing like that in what you're saying, that like, yeah, like if someone can't walk, how do we still let them fully participate?
I want to say fuck yes and mic drop moment to Julie. Thanks for that. I think that is such a good way to bring this back to, from like what Lisa's pointed out in the chat, is this like parenting discourse, parenting advice, this whole language that we get around wellness too, around wellness cultures. Like, how do we get these kids optimized, you know, like how do we get them all to the norm and normal? And it betrays, I think, what we value as witches, which is that interconnectedness, that attunement to each other, and paying attention to the people who need it probably helps the rest of us realize how deeply we need it too, and how deeply we've been lied to in this discourse of aloneness. So thanks for that, my friend. And thanks, Charlie, so much. You bring so much. It must be so interesting in your brain right now.
I'm so tired in my brain right now.
Colors and you're doing your PhD, so you're not just studying occupational therapy to practice, because you can practice that with a master's level, right? But you're going on, yeah. So you're going on to advance the field. You're digging in deep. Do you know what your PhD work?
So, and it's interesting with so occupational therapy. It's you know, it's a niche field that does weird niche things. So actually, I'm doing an OTD as opposed to a PhD. So it's a doctorate of occupational therapy. So essentially, what that means is we do a year of research on top of like what a clinician would normally do. And then if you do your PhD, it's 3 years of research on top of the clinician degree, on top of the master's. But so I'm kind of a little scattered right now. The main project I am focusing most of my time on at the moment is developing a yoga curriculum for veterans who have TBIs. So we've been doing a sleep study.
I don't know what it's
with traumatic brain injury. So with our veterans that we've been doing the yoga with, we've been mainly like trying to figure out postures and movements that help with sleep disturbances. So that's one of the projects I'm currently working on and authoring. And then my main focus is ultimately going to probably be pelvic floor therapy. I'm also a certified doula. So I really want to create within OT a kind of a bridging practice that it's pregnancy through labor to early childhood development. So it's like we'll stay with the birthing person and the kiddo throughout those early stages. So and for a big part of like what I'm going to be doing within that research is like education. Georgia has the most, I mean, it's unacceptable, the infant and mama mortality rates we have within labor in Georgia. And even compared to like, you know, within the same country, like California compared to Georgia, in terms of like healthcare, there aren't like these huge drastic difference in the healthcare we're receiving, but there is a huge difference within racism, within treatment of women. So doing a lot of the work I want to do is around education so that a lot of these more at-risk birthing people can have the right to have a safe birth.
Thanks for that. I feel emotional thinking about all of that for all of us because we're deeply connected and interconnected. It's truly so poignantly reminded us and need each other very badly. And because all of those women in Georgia are connected to us and fuck inequitable systems that are causing them violence. Thank you for your work and all your stories and for all the things you're holding in your brain right now, for a life that you chose to come back to when you were en bas de l'eau, as they say, when you were held under the water. In that moment that is so common to so many witches who came back. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for sharing so much with us today. And we can't wait to be in circle with you again. I hope that you will come back and join us for future conversations, because this feels so much like just a beginning. I want to put you in a room with Sophie Strand and 6 other people I've gotten to meet and just listen to y'all talk. Thank you so much to our coven for being here, for your questions and your kind energy, and for all the labor you're putting into the communities that you're in, your highly sensitive kids, your parents, your gardens, your own sweethearts.
You must be a witch.
The Missing Witches podcast is brought to you by the Missing Witches Coven. Join us right now on patreon.com/missingwitches. Blessed fucking be.